anyone else that wants to go on video, we would love to see you. Awesome. Good job, Bill.
Hi. I have problems with my connection and with everything. It's when I turn on video, it freezes all the time.
Well, Olga, that's a valid reason not to turn on video. We wish we could see you, but we don't want to make you.
No, but if I turn it on, it's get frozen, and then I have to.
Yeah, no, that's okay. It's not worth it if it's going to cause.
Restart everything, and then.
I like Olga's picture.
Okay, you can find it online. It's not my creation. It's just I found something that I like online. Okay. My connection sometimes better, sometimes worse, and for some reason, in the evening it's much worse than during the day. And you get frozen. You see, even without video, my turn on video. Okay, I will probably mute myself then.
I'm expecting a few more people. We got like almost 30 RSVPs, so I was expecting about 15, but you know, we'll see what we get. I'll wait till 5 after, and then we can get started. If anyone has specific questions about simulation theory that they want to bring up, I'm happy to, you know, either if I don't address them in the initial comments, then we can come back to them. But I'm curious if there are any specific things. I don't remember if we posted my paper on this subject or not. Did anyone see a paper about this?
I don't recall seeing a paper. I'd like to see it.
Yeah, it was posted.
Just an informal. It's an informal Google Doc, quite frankly, and that's all my papers are informal Google Docs. But some of them more well developed than others. This is one that hasn't seen as much airtime because it's a very theoretical thing. But I'm happy to post it. So
I have some questions. I apologize for not reading the paper. You want
that's okay. You didn't not do the homework. I don't think we gave it to you. So yeah.
So here's my question.
Yeah.
It's actually a longer question. We could divide out the possibilities logically. So we're in a simulation or we're not in a simulation. If we're not in a simulation, it makes sense to play like we're not in a simulation. Okay, we're in a simulation. We can detect whether we're in a simulation or we can't. So we're in a simulation, but we don't know we're in a simulation because we can't detect it. Well,
right.
That's an interesting case. What if we're in a simulation and we can detect it? Well, then that raises a whole another bunch of questions. Do we try to figure out what's going on with the simulation? Do we try to get in touch somehow with the authors or the creators of the simulation? There's a whole nother. So I believe your thesis was, doesn't matter whether we're in a simulation or not. But right. if there were a way to detect whether we're in a simulation, then it wouldn't matter, I think. Yeah. So anyway, that's my initial comments.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, I got a very general question for you, Garrett.
Sure, go ahead, Ron.
Two-part, just to learning the language. So simulation, would that be the equivalent of a popular term today called the virtual reality?
Yeah, like I think holographic universe, simulation, Matrix. Yeah, the Matrix is the popular movies, which were, I mean, depending on who you ask, I thought they were a lot of fun. I even liked the sequels. You know, really, you know, the Matrix is more or less, you know, and all of this more or less dates back to ancient Greece with Plato's cave. Right? It's the allegory of the cave, which is this concept, for those not familiar with it. Plato's cave is just, imagine that you're in a cave and there's a fire, and there are, you know, figures dancing around, and then those figures basically have shadows on the wall, and all you're seeing are the shadows on the wall as reality, whereas really reality is outside the cave. And so this whole concept of simulation theory or holographic universe, or I think Deepak Chopra calls it a holographic universe, and different people have different names, but it's all that what we perceive as reality is not actually reality. And you know, it's something that's been thought about for a really long time, probably goes back before ancient Greece, but I only know of references back to ancient Greece. So if anyone knows of earlier references, I would love to hear them.
So, yeah, so let me ask the second half of my question then,
Yeah.
which answers the question you just raised. So all of those terms could more or less be interchangeable for our purposes of conversation,
Yep.
communicating ideas. So I wonder if we could also interchangeably use the Eastern concept of Maya or illusion,
Yeah,
as
definitely.
it was elucidated by the Buddha at the same time that Socrates was alive in the West, the Buddha was alive in the East. And of course, the Buddha was commenting on his native ancient scriptures. He lived in India, which were, we don't know how much older, maybe 500, maybe 1,000, maybe 2,000 years, we don't know. But so the idea of, quote, a simulation or virtual reality has been examined in the East for even a longer time than in the West. So as the conversation proceeds, obviously I'm an advocate, or I at least sympathetic to the Eastern way of having looked at simulations. So it'll be obvious that that's the point of view I'm coming from.
Cool. And I want to invite everybody to join video. It's great to see you all. Thanks, Fika, for coming on video, even though it sounds like your internet is not so good. But if your internet dies, we'll just hope that you can come back, and that's okay. This will all be on YouTube afterwards if you missed stuff that you wanted to see, or just want to revisit. But let's kind of kick things off, I guess. We have about as many people as I was expecting. We may get a few more, but I want to kind of do a quick intro for the Freethinker Institute, and I'm going to share my screen real quick, which is my not-for-profit, which is what this event is organized through. We do meetings every Tuesday evening, and really we want to create a warm, open-minded community that helps people create transformative personal and professional growth. And really the ultimate goal is to increase happiness and decrease harm, which I'd argue is a reasonably good thing to be striving for. And someone's got a little bit of background noise. Jerome, I'm gonna mute you because there was some background noise. And really what we ultimately want to do is create an educational environment where everybody can learn about things that will help them in personal and professional development. We have a boot camp that I teach in product management for people who want a career in product management. And we do these events on Tuesday evenings to try to teach things that are not necessarily taught in school or in an academic environment, or even sometimes in a work environment. But that are useful to people. Most of what we focus on is practical knowledge or wisdom. And tonight is a little bit more theory-based. Our talk on free will the other week was very theory-based too. But we're kind of doing a little bit more theory stuff for a brief period. I don't know how brief it'll be, but we're working on, as a leadership team for the Freethinker Institute, a curriculum of stuff that I think will be really useful, and we're trying to very practical knowledge and wisdom, and we're trying to put all that together in one cohesive curriculum. So while that's going on, we're going to have a bunch of other events, and some of them will be more practical than others. We have one on critical thinking that'll be coming up in the next month or so, which I think is very practical, and a key thing that we want to help is help people develop their critical thinking skills. And ultimately we want to create a group. We're going to like work towards some sort of idea of membership in the Freethinker Institute, where members are trying to help each other be the best version of ourselves. And so that's kind of, and I'll be looking at different monitors so people know. I have a command center here with like 3 monitors. So yeah, if people have questions tonight, any questions about the Freethinker Institute, by the way, I'll put the link to our Discord community, which is an online community where we can chat between these Tuesday sessions. I'll put the link to the Discord community up so that anyone that wants to join that, we would love to have you and just, chat about intellectually interesting things, whatever's of interest to you, feel free to bring it up, and you can introduce yourself and whatever. If you have a company or an organization that you're a part of that you want to introduce, you can introduce those to the community as well. And it's really just a way for us to all stay connected on a regular basis. Any questions about the Freethinker Institute before we get started on the topic?
Yeah, can I ask you a question, if I may?
Yeah, please.
Did you ever hear of nonviolent communication?
I read a book called Nonviolent Communication. Yeah.
Okay, what do you know about it besides that?
Well, besides the book, I guess I don't know much because I read the summary of the book and I thought it was really good. But if you want to share something, go ahead.
They just have new courses now on meditation and other stuff besides, and there's a lot of things which your institute and them can really get together on.
Yeah, do you know anyone from there?
Oh yes. You can go on. You can go on for free for a month.
Okay.
For a whole month, and they let you look at all the courses and everything else to see what they're about.
Right.
If you want to do that, you just go on MVC, Nonviolent Communication, and you just put in a your username and password, whatever you want to make up, and they put you to the library free of charge for a month.
Cool.
And if you like it, fine, have a good day.
Great.
So Garrett,
So,
so Garrett, what have you got about simulation?
Great. So let's get into that.
yeah, thank you.
Sure. Thank you for bringing it up. And if you want to email me, I'll put my email in the chat. You can email me the link to the Nonviolent Communication site and I'll take a look at it.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So simulation theory, and we had kind of a little pre-talk about it. Simulation theory, I see as very synonymous with the holographic universe or the Matrix, like to name the popular movies, and Plato's allegory of the cave, where our perceived reality.
Can you mute everybody because there's background noise coming through?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for muting. Yeah, if you're not speaking, especially if you have background noise, please mute. Thanks, Ron, for that. And also, feel free to raise your hand. I think that's been a really good way in past events for people to say they want to say something. If you go down to the bottom under reactions, then you can raise your hand and it'll let me know that you want to say something, and then I'll try to find the next break so that I can let you ask a question. I love questions along the way, by the way. So don't feel like you have to wait till later to ask questions. Ask them, right away, so that it's in context, so that we can all hear what you have to ask about whatever I'm saying. And this is going to be, I don't have a long presentation tonight. It's I think just a couple of pages that I wrote on the subject. And I put the paper into the chat, but I'll put it in again because some people have joined. I thought through this because I used to get into debates with people about whether or not there's an objective reality, or whether or not everything is a simulation, or our perception of reality is completely flawed. And there are a lot of people that find it very intellectually interesting to argue that we have we actually in fact live in a simulation, and so everything that we perceive as reality is not the actual reality. There's actually some other reality. And extreme solipsism is the extreme version of this, where an extreme solipsist, for those that aren't familiar, says that the only thing that exists is them, and all the rest of us are just figments of their imagination. And there's a whole philosophical concept called the Boltzmann brain, which is like that you're a brain in a vat somewhere in the universe, and all that exists is you, and everything that you observe is really a figment of your imagination. And so all of these concepts are different sort of iterations on the allegory of the cave that Plato came up with, which I described earlier, is like the concept that you're in a cave and everything you see in the cave is like shadows dancing on the firelight in the cave. And if you were to walk out of the cave, you see actual reality. But everything that we see in our day-to-day life, everything we've experienced since birth, is really just, shadows on a cave, and we're not seeing actual reality. So what I'm going to try to do is make an argument that reality as we see it is more likely to be reality. And if it's not reality, the very best strategy is to treat it as if it's reality, even if it's not actually reality. And so if I'm right, then whether or not we live in a simulation is totally irrelevant, because the very best strategy for us is to treat that simulation, if it is a simulation, as reality. And so this is basic game theory, which is basically that either we live in a simulation or we live in reality. But the best strategy for us, whether we live in a simulation or we live in reality, is to treat what we experience as reality. And so if that's true, the whole concept of whether or not we live in a simulation is totally irrelevant, because we should treat it as reality, whether it is a simulation or not. So that's going to be my argument. I like to lay out what I'm going to try to show. I haven't shown why that's true. I'm going to walk through like why I think that. And then I would love for people to feel free to shoot holes in the argument, like as we go. If you just don't agree with something, or you think that something's not on solid ground, just raise your hand, and then we'll discuss your concerns. And then, if someone has a completely different hypothesis, we might save that till the end. But like any kind of commentary whatsoever on like what I'm presenting, like feel free to ask along the way. Does that make sense to everybody? Cool. And I want to encourage for people that joined, we love to have people on video. So those willing to be on video, we would love you on video. And thank you, Nicole, for being on video. Thank you, Robert, for being on video. Kudos to the video folks, the courageous. For those of us that are Stoics, we like to practice courage, and being on video takes a little courage. So thank you for those that are. And I want to encourage anyone that is up for it to be on video. That said, I'm going to be looking at my other screen and just kind of paraphrasing. I don't know, is it better if I share my screen? I don't know if you guys will even be able to read it, but I put the paper in the chat. Let me just, I guess it's probably better to share it than it is to not share it, right? So you'll at least see where I am, and you'll be able to see the text that I'm paraphrasing. So basically, I kind of talked about this. And so basically, there are two possibilities, right? Either reality that we perceive is reality, or reality is a simulation. And essentially, if reality is a simulation, then there must have been something or something that created the simulation, right? It had to come from somewhere, right? A simulation like this doesn't just magically create automatically by itself, right? So something must have created it. And so I would argue that we have to think about, well, let's just assume that this is a simulation, for argument's sake. Well, why did this, seemingly very intelligent being to create something so seemingly real, create the simulation? And I would argue that it's most likely to test like how we would do in the simulation. And so, I guess theoretically they could just be hypothetically curious, and like we're like an ant farm and they just want to see how the ants act. But like that seems unlikely, because anything complex enough to create a simulation this nuanced and interesting is unlikely to just be entertained by something that is so much of a lower life form as us, that that's a really practical answer. So I would argue that this is a test of some sort if this is a simulation. Personally, I think that reality is reality, but I'm kind of suspending my own judgment to just say, if life is a simulation, it was probably created by some, super smart being that created this this sort of simulation. And if reality is reality, I do want to just address that situation, which if reality is reality, then I would argue, and I have another argument for free will, which we covered a few weeks back. I argue that we do have free will for anyone interested, and I can share that paper. It's in the online community in the reference channel. And if we do have free will, then we have a responsibility, in my opinion, to do what we think is going to make the world a better place, which for me is increasing happiness and decreasing harm, which is why that's what the Freethinker Institute is about. And so I would argue that, if this is reality, we should try to make the world a better place, because that's something that will be better for ourselves and the people that we interact with. And gosh, doesn't that seem like a good thing, to make everybody happier that we interact with and to decrease the amount of harm that they suffer from? And so, for me, that becomes like a sort of simple answer, although it is very complex, because there's a whole debate on morality, which we'll talk about another night. I don't want to get into like whether or not there are morals, or whether or not we should be following any morals, because that's kind of a different subject. And I don't want to digress on that tonight, although if we finish this early and people want to talk about that, I'm game for anything intellectually interesting. But let's cover the other case, which is supposing that reality is a simulation. So let's just basically say this higher being is evil. If it was evil, it could, with the power that it has to create a simulation this complex, it could easily imagine a far worse situation for all of us, where we're being tortured in eternal hell, constantly, and life is just crap for every single person, and or at least for us, like, and I could imagine a much worse life than the one that I'm living. I'm actually like a pretty happy person, so I guess I could definitely imagine a much worse life. And so, but I think no matter how bad someone's life is, I think there's always a way that it could be worse. And so if this higher power was simulating a really evil, really wanted to just make people miserable, our lives would all be much worse than they are today. So I think it's pretty unlikely that whatever being created the simulation was evil. Now, if they're benevolent, it's likely they're testing whether or not, when we have free will, if we have free will, I'm going to assume that we do for the sake of argument, because if we don't, then all of this is null and void, because I'm just doing what I was programmed to do by the laws of physics. And so, it's another story. But if we have free will, then this benevolent being is testing whether or not we're going to be benevolent ourselves when we have the freedom to not be benevolent. And that basically says that it's in your best interest to be benevolent. And we'll talk a little bit, I guess, I can say what I think is being benevolent is to increase happiness and decrease harm for the people we can influence. Again, that gets into morality, and we can all have our own definition of what benevolent means. But whatever the higher powers, or like the creator of the simulation, whatever that creator of the simulation's intention of benevolent is what it's probably testing us for. And I would argue that all of us kind of have an inherent idea of whether or not we're doing something bad or good, to some degree. And I think trusting our instinct as far as like doing what's good is probably the right answer, in terms of being aligned with whatever created the simulation, because we probably would have some sort of guidance, and I think we all naturally have some sort of guidance. That said, it's possible that creator of the simulation is neutral. Now, this is the more nuanced case, and I'm going to try to make an argument that I think this is less likely, because if it's neither good nor evil, well, let's just walk through the scenarios here. So basically, suppose that you act evil. Like, a neutral being could theoretically, consider acting evil as, not necessarily a bad thing, because it's neutral and maybe it's non-judgmental creator. But I would argue that if we look at day-to-day life, and if you look back on your life at the times that you made decisions that you felt like were the right thing to do, and you made decisions that you felt like were, you know, either unethical or causing harm to other people, or, you know, using my version, decreasing happiness or increasing harm for other people that you can influence, in a net sort of way, I would argue the results of those things are usually bad. And so that's what I call acting evilly, or like bad, is like decreasing happiness and increasing harm is bad. And so, and there's always this exchange, right? Like, you know, when you get your blood drawn, it hurts you a little bit, so you suffer a little bit of harm, but the overall harm that you're going to reduce in the long term in your life by getting that blood test, it actually far outweighs the little bit of harm. And so there's, you know, what I call net present positivity, which is if you take all the harm that you or people you can influence will perceive in their lifetime, and all the happiness that you and people you can influence will achieve in their lifetime, what we want to do is maximize the net present positivity, the happiness minus the harm, knowing that there's an exchange rate of, you know, if we suffer a little bit of harm and we study hard in college, we get better grades, then we're more likely to get a better job. And so, yeah, it's like worth working hard and suffering a little bit of, you know, going to one last party to get a better grade might be worth the happiness that it outweighs. And then again, maybe the other way around, right? That's a judgment call. I'm not going to judge anyone that chose to party instead of studying. But because sometimes the network that you create from partying is actually more valuable than the grades that you got from studying. So it's a toss up there. I don't know what the right answer is in terms of college. Not that I should say that to potential college students that watch this YouTube video, but that said, you know, I guess, you know, to me, it seems pretty natural that what I would call good behavior is rewarded with more positivity in my life. Like the times that I made decisions that aligned with my values and with my morals, like my inherent sense of what was right and wrong. And really that I made decisions that increased overall happiness and decreased overall harm. More happiness and harm came, you know, less harm came into my life and that of people that I could influence. And so to me, there's kind of a natural weight in the reality that I perceive towards good behavior. And so that makes me think that it's less likely that that if this is a simulation, the behavior that's rewarded is what I would call good behavior. And so it's more likely to me that whoever or whatever created the simulation is on the good side rather than the neutral side. And even if it's on the neutral side, I'm still getting more benefit out of doing what I think is good. So I'm kind of going to go with that. That's pretty anecdotal, but I guess, you know, I'm curious, you know, basically, if anyone has an argument that counters that or like goes against that theory that if we do live in a simulation, that the creator of the simulation is more likely than not, again, not definitively, like we're not trying to create a scientific proof here, but that using like probabilities and game theory, that the chances are good that the creator of the simulation is testing whether or not we do the right thing and sort of trust our inherent sense of what's right and wrong. Does anyone see a good argument against that?
I was just thinking about how, yeah, humans do experiments. Oh, sorry, I didn't raise my hand.
That's okay. Since you started talking, Robert, go ahead, and then Ayala. And I apologize if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, Ayala. So go ahead, Robert, and then Ayala, and then Bill.
Sorry, I'll be quick, but yeah, I was just thinking about how like humans do experiments on animals, and you sort of touched on that a little bit. And like, I don't know, even something like an ant farm, right, is in a way a simulation because we're taking them out of their natural environment. So I don't know, like from, I guess, a more scientific point of view versus a moral point of view, it's possible, even if we ourselves aren't necessarily benefiting from the simulation. It's just sort of where we are.
Yeah, so it's definitely possible, but imagine, I mean, imagine like the level of intelligence that would be required to create what we experience. And maybe there is some insight that something so intelligent as to be capable of creating our perceived reality can learn something from us, just like we learn from ants. But I guess, it's like we have this whole pretty complex, very large, like theoretically, like if it was just doing an experiment, why would we have even the whole perceived universe, right? Like, why would it be that big, and that complex? And I would argue the universe is much bigger than, and there's evidence that the universe is much bigger than the perceived universe, but that's another story for another day. We can talk about, I have a paper on the origins of the universe, which tries to argue that the universe is bigger than the perceived universe. But yeah, like definitely, Robert, I can see where you're coming from. Like, it's theoretically possible. I would just argue it seems less likely to me. So Ayala, and I'm sorry if I
Yeah.
pronounced your name.
No,
wrong, if I
don't
did.
apologize. It's perfect, actually.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Surprised. Yeah. Well, of course, it is possible that there is some higher power there that the same way people believe that there is a higher power that intervenes with our football games and make sure that one league wins over the other and all this. I mean, we can't prove that it's not possible, so it's possible. But how probable, it's very highly improbable if you observe the cosmos around us, which is so big in nature, which is amoral. It's not moral or moral. It is just neutral. It is not concerned. It doesn't have intentions. So there is no morality here. And I think that the simulation theory kind of comes from a anthropocentric perspective, the perspective that we are so hot, we humanoids so hot, that somebody will make it their business to create a simulation for us to live in or test us. It just, it sounds to me like a very arrogant and anthropocentrist. I think we are just a life form. We are an animal, a mammal, like many others. We have higher faculties, frontal cortex faculties, where they have other forms of intelligence, which is problem solving that we don't have. And that's it. Now, as far as knowing if there is an objective reality, that's a little different question. That is not a simulation. And that is something that we will never be able, as humanoids, not science and not philosophers, will solve that issue of the subjective experience or the science experience, as to prove that there is something beyond our human experience, right?
I'm curious, what is it that leaves an area of doubt other than simulation theory for whether or not we we live in an objective reality? What else would cause there to be a seed of doubt for you?
Watching nature, which is a bigger presence than us, the laws of physics, of nature, of mathematics. There is no, humans have don't count there as a center of attention at all. It's just we are participants. And by the way, you mentioned that we have to assume free will. And actually, I see no reason to assume free will. We have agency, we have authorship of our behavior, which is, again, the experience. We experience something that seemed to us to be a free will. But look, if you want me to debate free will, I can do it now, but it will take a minute.
We did
No.
that. We did that the other week. So feel free to go back and watch the
Right.
YouTube video. It'll be up in the next couple of weeks.
Well, I've done a lot of philosophical pursuits about free will. Yeah, I've read a lot about it. So no, there is no free will that we know of. And if there is, it's very minute.
So I don't want to digress on free will. I wasn't saying that we should assume free will. I was just saying if we don't have free will, then everything that I'm saying was predetermined anyway. So it doesn't matter whether we have free will if I don't have free will, because I'm going to say whatever I'm going to say, and so are you. So I would argue that even for those that don't believe we have free will, we still, most of them are compatibilists and say we should still act as if we have free will, even if we don't really have free will. So the question of free will is more of a theoretical question, since even the people who don't believe we have free will agree that we should act like we do. So that said, I guess
no, just one thing. There is a little benefit here. There is a benefit to know that we are affected and influenced by a lot of factors in life that are not within our control, which means we don't have free will. And that is compassion, understanding of circumstances when we do blaming or praising of other people. And also the fact that there might be another objective reality and not necessarily a simulation also helps in the same way to reduce the level of certainty that causes people all those wars and conflicts. That's all.
So I don't want to keep going on free will, but I'm curious what would make you doubt objective reality. And when I say objective reality, what I mean is that we're on Earth and that Earth is an oblate spheroid, traveling throughout the universe, and there's a solar system, there's a sun, Australia exists, North America exists, that these are actually objective things and places, and the Empire State Building exists. Everybody has observed it, taken pictures of it. All the pictures look pretty much the same. So for me, that's what I mean by that objective reality exists, is that the things that are like, beyond the shadow of a doubt, validated by many people having the same observations that are consistent with some underlying reality that we are observers of. And when we observe it in many different ways, it all comes back to say there's the same underlying reality behind that. That's what I mean by objective reality.
Objective reality is a different issue. And we cannot, I didn't say it doesn't exist. I have no idea. I said we cannot prove it because of the subjectivity of our experiences.
Right. So I just described what I mean by,
go to the positivists, okay? The positivists, Locke, Hume, Berkeley, they dealt with that issue, and they agree that it's impossible. And we do assume we have to live in a certain comfort in our life. So we assume that what we live in is the reality. But simulation reality, the way you describe it, is not identical to objective reality. It means it is a test or an experiment which someone designed or something designed for us. And that's what doesn't make sense to me.
Right. And it doesn't make sense to me either, Ayala, but what I described as objective reality, it sounded like you agreed exists, but what you're describing as objective reality.
I assume I live in that. I can't prove it. Yeah.
Right. And yeah, like theoretically, like we can't really prove anything if we can't prove that objective reality exists, because like if we don't believe anything that we've observed since birth, like you kind of lose all semblance of like a compass, like of reality. That said, I want to let someone else ask a question. So Bill, you're next. Go ahead.
Okay, it's been so long, I forgot what the
Sorry.
original question is that we're supposed to comment on. Can you remind me?
I don't think there was a specific, like, I'm not sure what your question was. If you want to come back, we can come back to you when you think of it. I don't think, like, I didn't ask a specific question that I was looking for a response to. I was just looking for, oh, wait, maybe I did. I was asking about whether or not anyone could find fault with the argument that I laid out, basically, about the fact that whoever created or whatever created the simulation was benevolent. That was the original question that I posed.
Okay, so my hypothesis is that the person that the entity that created the simulation is the equivalent of a high school student doing a science project. I mean, it's some much grander, more bigger and more intelligent species and more knowledgeable and so forth. But maybe it's just, okay, kid, make a universe. Maybe that's the training for it to be a god. Whatever it is, it could be neither benevolent nor evil. Just to sort of see what's happened. And we don't know if they're going to get a good grade because we don't know what the rules are, what the evaluation criteria are. So, but at least you don't have to assume it's benevolent. Maybe it's just curious.
I'm curious, have you, like, because I mentioned that, in my life, I've observed that when I do what inherently feels right, I end up with better results than when I do something that I inherently feel is wrong. Have you gotten that sense from your life as well? I'm curious for other people.
My personal approach to this is much like yours. Try to do as much good for everybody as possible.
Right.
Okay. So, but I don't treat that as a moral rule. I don't treat that as a responsibility.
Right.
It's just, it's just good advice. So in someplace in your paper 2A, we have a responsibility to do the best we can in this world. I don't think we have such a responsibility. We're just better off if we do the best we can for everybody. So it's a question of the nature of the work, the nature of is it advice or is it a command?
Right.
Say, you should do the best you can to help everybody as much as you can. You should. What's the nature of that should?
Right.
That's my question. And you don't actually address it in your paper. So my comment is,
Well, this paper is not about morality. We'll get to that when we talk about morality another day. So,
but what I'm saying is,
yeah.
In this paper,
Right.
put footnotes and citations to your other
Right.
papers so we can follow
Right.
the argument, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's all I
no,
have.
fair enough. Fair enough. I didn't fully address it. Ayala, did you still have your hand up from before? Or did you have another question? I feel like I'm not sure how you ended up ahead of, like, I feel like the hands got out of order, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, I forgot
Okay.
to take it down.
So Ron, do you want to go next?
Yes, okay, thank you. So I want to follow your argument in the beginning. And what you're saying is, if we take the position that it's possible we're living in a simulation, okay, I'm willing to go there. If it's a simulation, then the next question you raise is, if it's a simulation, then it has to be a simulator, and that simulator has to be in some way of some sort of a higher in order to create this simulation of 200 billion galaxies and so forth and so on, right? So the question I really want to pose is, if we accept that there is a simulator in some way of a higher order, then it seems, I paraphrase Einstein, he said that a problem is never solved at the order of the problem. You have to go outside of the level of the problem. So I don't think that as an individual human being using our brain to its maximum capacity, there's any way that we can understand, yet alone judge this quote simulator, what his, her, or its rhyme or reasons are, and that it's a rather dead end for us to speculate, on the rhyme and reason of this simulation. I think a much more useful direction to take is to ask what is our, that is to say, and my relationship to this simulator, if this is all a simulation. Is it, I think that, and that's a huge area, and I'm not suggesting we necessarily go there, but I think that that is a much, much more important question to ultimately examine, is if indeed this is a dream, maya, a simulation, then what is our relationship to it?
Yep, I think that's interesting. Let's, if you can, Ron, remind me if we finish the topic of like, yeah, I guess I'm curious, like, what would be like, I mean, why do you feel like, if I can ask quickly, why do you feel like it's more interesting, our relationship to the simulator, rather than whether or not, like, how we should act within the simulation in terms of like our daily decisions and actions? Why is our relationship to the creator of the simulation more important than what we do with our daily actions?
Well, briefly, it's been the general attitude of humanity, as far as historically we have records of, that this simulation is a world of pleasure and pain. A lot of pain and a lot of suffering in this simulation. And the reason that we would want to find out if there's a relationship is because if there is a relationship of identity, for example, as one possibility between you and I and the simulator, then that may be an avenue of release from the suffering of the simulation. And of course, anybody who's familiar with Buddhism knows that that's a brief summary of the, essential thought, lines of Buddhism, but it's found in all the major traditions, some way of salvation from this world of, of sorrow and suffering. And the record of humanity across the planet and across the millennia is that there is a relationship and there is a way out of this simulation of suffering, but we need to discover it, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, Ron. And I guess to me, those two are sort of united in that I see the way out of suffering, which I think aligns with Buddhism, as using reason to do what we feel is right, which is more or less what I argue in this paper, is that we should use reason to do what we feel is right, because that is, to me, the path to reduce suffering and increase happiness. I say to reduce harm because it's slightly different than suffering, because suffering puts it all on the sufferer to like absolve themselves of suffering, whereas I say reduce harm is kind of like a group, we can reduce harm for others, whereas reducing suffering is like a very self-infused thing, which I'm a little more like team sport than I guess Buddhism. But so I think like that I see both of those things as very similar, Ron, which is, if we do have something in common with this higher power, I think it is the ability to reason and to know right from wrong. And so I think that the higher power that created the simulation expects us to use those. And I think Buddhism and Stoicism are both philosophies that hold man's reason at the highest good. In fact, the Buddha himself said, don't believe anything you read, in your religious books or from your religious leaders. In fact, don't believe anything I say myself unless you believe it to be true with your own ability to reason and your own judgment. You believe it's right. And that's the words of someone who's truly like, self-confident that his ideas are so good that other people will believe they're good. And I try to say the same thing because I think that was such good wisdom that I want to follow it. So with that said, Ron, I want to let Robert go, unless if you have anything else you want to say, Ron, feel free, but otherwise I want to let Robert go.
No, go ahead.
Cool, go Robert. You're on mute. Yeah, go ahead.
There it is. Sorry, I lost the mute button, or lost the button for a second there. So yeah, a lot of my thoughts were similar to what Ron was saying. Yeah, one thing I think it's possible to take morality out of the discussion. Like I think it's possible to approach this idea without trying to think of it as from the higher power's point of view necessarily, or without taking the higher power into account. Because I think if there is a creator, their intentions don't necessarily impact whether or not the simulation exists. Whether they made it for bad reasons, good reasons, any reason, then it's the simulations could still exist in any of those circumstances. So if we are taking, I guess, morality into account, I think the question is whether or not we want to live our lives like we are in a simulation. I think that poses a lot of interesting questions. Because yeah, it's easy to not live your life as if you're in a simulation, but it would, I think, maybe potentially if you think you're just in a simulation and nothing matters, you could do whatever you want, right? But yeah, and I guess a more real example, I was thinking about religion and how Christianity sort of believes that life is a simulation. And by that, I mean, they don't, like, Christianity introduces the idea of living your life to get more benefits in the afterlife, right? So you're not necessarily living your life right now to live your life. Like, that's not all there is. You're living your life to get to the afterlife. So in a sense, life is a simulation and afterlife is sort of the reality. So that's one way I kind of was looking at it, that kind of turns it around, where in that situation, you do want this to be the simulation, right? And I think for that reason, it would be important to you, like the question of whether or not we live in a simulation would be important.
Well, yeah, no, that's a great point. I guess the one part that I'm confused about is you said that if we live in a simulation, you can just do whatever you want. But I tried to make an argument earlier, and I don't know if you found issue with any part of my argument. I tried to make the argument that if we do live in a simulation, that the creator of the simulation, were they evil, our simulation would look much worse than it does now, right? Like, why would we have so much positivity in life if the simulator were evil? We would be, burning in eternal hell and suffering constantly. I don't think it would be quite as positive as, like, we live in the healthiest, wealthiest world that has ever existed in recorded history. Things are, overall on the up and up. And so why would that be the case if the simulator was horribly evil, right? That would be a little weird. So I'm curious why you think that. So if the creator is good or even neutral, then, like, wouldn't there be a benefit to doing what we think is right in that case, where increasing happiness and decreasing harm, basically?
So I don't know, one thing that stood out to me is that you said this is the most good, well, sorry, I'm not getting the exact words, but like the most good world in history.
Safest world in history. So if you read,
but it's also the poorest and worst world in history, is it not?
No, it's not. Like, if you go back to any other time in history, it was like more dangerous, poorer, less safe. we live in like literally the best world that has ever existed. So if you
But
read
it's the only
Stephen
world
Pinker's
that's
book,
existed.
No, no,
Tell
I
it to
mean,
the Ukrainians.
I'm talking about different times in the Earth's history. Like if you take Earth 100 years ago, it was much poorer, much less safe. There were like almost all aspects of society that you look at 100 years ago were worse. And if you go 100 years back, it was worse. Now there are like fluctuations overall, but the overall trend of Earth's history is that, you know, human life is getting better and better with time.
But like if we were in a simulation, wouldn't the simulation be telling us potentially that we are living in a good time? I don't know.
Why? Like
Does-
if the simulator was evil, he would be saying that we're objectively horrible human beings and our lives are going to get worse and worse and we're going to suffer more and more, right? If the simulator was horrible, our, you know, everything would be on the down and down, right? Like everything would be getting worse and worse. It'd be going from horribly bad to even worse, right? Like, I mean, we can easily imagine like a bad intent, like, you know, think of the most poorly intentioned person that you know, they're not going to make everybody's lives better over time, right? They're going to make them worse. And so, you know, a creator, same concept theoretically.
I don't know, it just feels like to me, when we approach it from a morality kind of standpoint, there's always the flip side to it. That's where I sort of feel that it's not holding up as well as it could. That's
You know
all.
what's funny? I think we definitely have to do a talk about morality because I find that it's a very large percentage of the population that is against saying that there is any kind of reason to have morality. And even people, and I think it was Bill that said, I try my best to do what I think is right, but I don't think people should be obligated to do what's right. And so I'm going to put that as like a, you know, a note for the future that we should talk about morality. I'm going to try to make, you know, accelerate my paper on morality to, you know, try to make a good logical argument for morality. And I'll just have a reminder that all morality means is that there are better and worse actions to take, and that, you know, the more moral action is what we would consider right action, meaning, you know, a better action to take. So if I could choose to kill an innocent person or not choose to kill an innocent person, the moral thing to do is to not kill the innocent person, is more or less all that morality means. But that said, we'll save that for another day. I want to let Sam go.
Hi.
Hi.
Okay, so I definitely agree with you that there is no difference if you live in simulation or not. It's still you have to pay rent. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, we can pretend that we don't have to, and like,
yes,
you know,
yes.
but it goes down a
Still you
very
have to
dark
do
path in
something.
that direction. So I
Yeah.
agree with you, Sam.
And we ourselves absolute kind of we constantly simulate different realities. Realities, for example, a reality where someone rent apartment and have to pay rent. You see, it could be different reality where you don't rent apartment, don't have to pay rent. For example, or live somewhere in fields, and there was kind of this reality. But when you start to say that there is definitely should be simulator that separate from us, it's you can doubt it, because you could imagine when we talk about simulation, we could imagine anything. We could imagine that every one of us behind us, and we create some kind of avatar, and we kind of and every so this simulation may be created by everyone, and not only humans but also animals. There is like we, for example, we have maybe even choice to become a human or a lion or a virus. You see, so we could imagine anything. So simulation could be absolutely different. And actually simulation is very strange. It's not strange term, of course, because we got to the simulation on computer screen, so we call it simulation. But we could call it differently, and it's not necessarily. And when we start to say that, start to try to first determine if simulator is separate from us, or actually inside of us, or actually behind of us, or whatever, and say that it's definitely on the better side than on like bad side. It's not definitely evil, because it would be very bad, but I live long enough to see it's not. Yes, maybe you can say when you read books that it's better and better, but it's not better and better for a lot of human beings, and not only human beings. So right now we see the world is much worse shaped than it was like 50 years ago. So it's much worse shape, and so it's we could of course argue it, and yeah, but it's not extremely believable. But I definitely agree with you that it's no difference between, and again, about evil, there was so much literature about evil. A lot of people try to understand what actually it is, and how he would or she would tempt us, what kind of temptation it could be, and why the road to hell built without our best intentions. So it's I'm not sure how even approach it. That's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Olga. Sam Deans, sorry, I had meant to call on you.
Did you say my name?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. There's dogs here. Stop it. Right. So the simulation. A simulation is supposed to be like real life, correct?
I mean,
Right.
You can imagine it being anything you want, right? It's just
Well,
not
sorry,
what we perceive.
I came in late and missed
So-
a couple of things. But
You
a
can imagine
simulation
it
is
being
supposed
anything other than what we see as reality, just be like, that our reality as we perceive it, what is a simulation from something else creating us, creating this existence that we perceive as reality, other than that reality is just what it is what we mean by that. We talked about how it's like the Matrix or holographic universe or Plato's allegory of the cave.
So I think that a simulation is supposed to represent, it's supposed to be evidence for a procedure in like scientific terms. You stop. Sorry, it's for scientific terms. So you're supposed to learn something from it, supposedly. So you want to replicate exactly what happens. So things that happen in a lab are supposed to mimic what happens in nature. So everyone, from what I've heard since I joined, everybody's been talking about how, the simulation would be like, if it was really bad, it's supposed to be like just pain and suffering, and then all these bad things would happen. But what if the pain and suffering is exactly, I know this is going to sound really dark, but what if it is exactly what life is? It's like you try to get something, and then just as soon as you get it, you're not happy with it. I mean, I'm pretty sure there's some sort of Sartre play. I mean, I know maybe it's no exit, but I believe that, a simulation, if they really want it to be real, is they sorry, my thoughts are all jumbled. They'll make it so that I was reading from what your document said about, could you scroll down a little bit for me to the
Yeah.
end of the document where you were? The alternative, it was said something
I can put
about,
the link in again if you didn't get it, if you joined late.
right.
If you don't
Okay.
mind, I'll let you take a look at it. And do you have anything else you want to say, Sam, or should we let Jason go
Yes.
next?
Okay, here we go.
Okay, go ahead.
Be powerful enough to prevent us from being able to, there it is. Sorry about, I lost my train of thought. So prevent us from being able to conceive that we're in a simulation.
Right.
So if someone is powerful enough to prevent us from knowing that, wouldn't they want a simulation to be as if people could do anything, right? To simulate what real life is like. So if you're not able to conceive of something, that means that something might be wrong. I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm going off a little off path, but you know, they would want people to be able to think something because they don't want. So in order to control someone, that's what the powerful creator of this world is. They would want people not to rebel. So if they're having the possibility of people knowing that there is a simulation takes away the power from it, because there are all these other solutions, and when there are so many solutions, the right one is diluted. I know I'm not the best with words, but I think that's what I had to say. Sorry, these dogs are all over me for some reason.
Okay, thanks. Jason, do you want to go next?
Yes, I would. So I hear a lot of talk about this creator being like some sort of higher power, endowed with the abilities to create a simulation that we exist in. And have we considered the idea that it's not a higher power, but it is in fact like people no more capable than ourselves? And the simulation is for a base reality, like a reality like they're using this simulation to learn from, or I don't know what it is to be learned from, but like like it is an experiment of some kind, but it's very similar to the base reality that we originated from. And I don't know what variables are getting changed out, but if you think about perception, right? Like, what do you really experience as far as the universe? It's, images. It's like we don't actually, like, we understand the fundamental like rules of the universe, and there's probably, and we're still a far way to go in that. And I think that that is all something that could be included in a simulation. The rules of engagement, so to speak, for the simulation could have been coded, or however the base reality decided to put that information. I don't know if they use computers the way we do. I'd imagine they're advanced technologically beyond where we're at. But yeah, so I was thinking, like, as far as our understanding of science and where we are in the universe, like those things could be simulated. I think we're capable of such things, and within like the next, I don't know, 100,000, 10,000 years, we'll probably have our own simulations running, multiple simulations going that are going to be very real. And I'd imagine the AI in them probably won't be able to tell the difference. They won't, even if it's not as aesthetically pleasing, like as far as pixels are concerned, or however how you like I think we'll be able to eventually create simulations that are very real to the AI that's in them. Also, so I was, as far as morality is concerned, and like doing the right thing is rewarding, that's not true. That's definitely not true. I was a vegetarian on and off because I know ethically it is the right thing to do without a reasonable doubt. That is the correct way to live your life. I'm always miserable when I do it. I lose friends. I'm not, like, you can't eat anywhere except black bean burgers. Well, this was way back. There's more options now, but my point is, like, it's less pleasant doing the right thing in certain circumstances. And so I feel like if God was a benevolent, or the simulator, we'll call it, the team of simulators, whatever you want to call them, was a benevolent being, my life wouldn't be worse from doing the correct action morally, like aligned with my values. It wouldn't be worse. So I'm sorry if I went on a tangent. I just was waiting a while to get to me, and it was brewing.
Yeah.
So
Sorry, I like to let everybody kind of finish their thought and discuss it before we go to the next person. So that's why it took a while. But I think what you said is, maybe the people creating, or the higher power creating the simulation is no more capable than ourselves. But then you went on to clarify that maybe ourselves at some point in the future, meaning they could be human-like, or like, some futuristic type of human, but clearly they're like more advanced than us, right? Because we can't currently create a simulation like the one we perceive as reality, right? Like I guess you would agree with that like current human capability, as far as we know, can't create a simulation as complex and nuanced as the reality that we perceive, right?
Current capability, like, I think in the like, as far as trend is concerned, the upward trend of technology and our ability to create worlds, like if you are a gamer, like the worlds that are created compared to what they were 20 years ago it's completely, like, you can see it happening, like
it's getting way more advanced.
we're definitely not there. We're definitely not there yet, for sure.
We're not at like the reality we perceive. And if my argument for free will is right, we have a metaphysical free will, which is a non-deterministic decision-making process. And that type of thing, we're nowhere, like, we don't even, like, most people don't accept that we even have it. And most people don't even think we have it. So being able, if we do really have it, like being able to create it is way beyond even the distant future of our capabilities. Now that's a philosophical question that you should read or watch the discussion on free will to see whether or not I have a good argument that we have metaphysical free will. But yeah, I guess I definitely agree with you that sometimes in the short term, doing what we think is right may cause harm. The question is whether or not in the long term it's more beneficial to do that, and whether or not there are ways of doing what we feel is right that will help us thrive in spite of the possible landmines that we could run over. And so I would say it's a pretty complex and nuanced subject, and I don't want to fully address it because it's a morality conversation. So we're gonna have a great.
I think it ties into the question of whether or not we should live as though we're in a simulation or not. If we're in a simulation, we're getting rewarded in the long term for doing the right thing, then I think, like, it's a worthy investment. But if we're not in a simulation, and like it pays to be selfish sometimes, and you live a fuller, richer life by doing the things that interest solely you, and your immediate circle, then I think that's really what we're talking about, right? Like that's the
Yeah.
butt of the conversation.
Yeah, I guess like we're talking about whether or not the perception of reality is really reality, or whether or not it's more likely to be a simulation, and whether or not it even matters whether or not it's reality or simulation. The question of what is the right thing to do in life is a question of morality. So that's where I guess I would draw the line, is the former types of questions are for tonight, and the question of like what is right conduct or the right thing to do in a specific situation, I would argue. And I did kind of touch on morality, Jason, so you're not wrong in addressing it, and I'm not trying to say like it wasn't brought up, but I just don't want to, it's a big rabbit hole, right? And it's a big complicated conversation that we should focus a specific night on. So that's the only reason I'm not fully addressing that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I did kind of say like, if we do what we inherently feel is right, that's beneficial and more aligned with what I think, a creator of a simulation would be like. So you're not often bringing it up. So I don't mean to table it for another night when I started to bring it up, and I am kind of doing that, and I'm sorry for it. But I do think that morality is like its own topic that deserves its own night. And Sam and Olga, you still have your hands up, but both of you went, so you may want to put your hands down. And Jason, if you had anything else you wanted to mention, let me know, but otherwise I want to let Robert go.
Oh, I had a little more. I had a little more to say.
Okay. There are two Sam Deans. That's interesting.
Oh yeah, no, I'm on my phone because I went mobile, but
Okay.
I'll be back to the one.
Okay. Can we come back to you, like Sam, after we go to Robert and Will and Ron?
Of course.
Well, if you don't mind, just put your hand down and put it back up, and then it'll go right back in the right order.
Yeah, sure. Just a moment.
Sure. Go ahead, Robert.
So yeah, so I don't know, I'm trying to think about your approach to the simulation, and I don't know, my understanding is that the idea of the simulation could be irrelevant because everyone should act good or morally regardless of whether or not there is a simulation. Yeah, to my point earlier, I think it could matter a lot to Christians because arguably that is the point of life in that belief system. So like, if we're looking at it purely from a moral standpoint, like if it's a question of whether or not we should act morally, then it doesn't matter. But if it's a question of beliefs and not morals, then it could matter quite a bit depending on the person. So I guess that's why I kind of introduced the idea of Christianity. I don't know, it's the religion I'm most familiar with that sort of, because of the belief in the afterlife, our current life does sort of become a simulation in a way. The acts, like we are sort of living our life to get to the afterlife. And then once kind of life starts and the afterlife begins, life no longer plays any role in what happens. So I don't know, I kind of see that as like a different way of looking at a simulation. So yeah, so I think if it is a question of beliefs, I think the simulation could become significant. I did kind of think of an idea of how to approach the simulation, like to call it irrelevant without taking those things into account if you're interested. Or I can go back in the queue.
No, can I bring that up again? But let me first ask, you said that Christianity sort of makes whether or not we live in a simulation relevant, but Christians don't say we live in a simulation, right? They say treat reality as reality, but also do what the Bible says, and that will give you a good afterlife. I definitely think it's intellectually interesting, your comparison of, maybe, Christianity to a simulation, and this is a test, and this life is a test, and therefore this life is kind of like a simulation to a Christian. But a Christian still treats this reality, whether it's a simulation or not, they treat it as reality either way. because they believe they'll be judged in the afterlife, whether it's a simulation or reality. They treat it as reality because they think that the same judgment will come, whether it's simulation or reality. So I guess to me, like, I don't see why it makes whether or not we live in a simulation relevant, because a Christian perspective still says treat what we think is reality as reality, whether it's a simulation or not. Does that make sense?
Well, then, I don't know, I guess it might be a kind of question of what you consider to be a simulation. Yeah, like, I guess I see simulation as something you can kind of get out of and expand your reality. So yeah, I mean, if then you could say the simulation is also reality, and when you get out of the simulation, it's also reality, right? Like, if you're a brain in a vat and then you get put into a body, they're both realities in a sense. I don't know, just, yeah, then I'd say it'd be important to kind of define what a simulation is.
Yeah, I guess I kind of described what I refer to as objective reality before, which is the Empire State Building is a real building and it exists, and many people have observed it. They've all had similar observations. All of our pictures look the same. So the Empire State Building is a building, and it is physical mass energy, and that mass energy is not, a part of some supercomputer of a higher intelligence being. It is actual reality as we perceive it to be. So that's what I mean by objective reality. A simulation would be like we and all of our existence is a part of some highly intelligent supercomputer simulation or something like that, where everything we think is real physical mass energy is not actually reality. It is, and I should have started with definitions. Hassan is not here to remind me that.
Well, you mentioned like Plato's cave.
Yeah.
Is Plato's cave less real because they can get up and walk out of it?
Yeah, so
wouldn't that be this similar to life and afterlife? Like sitting in the cave isn't necessarily not real. It's just a different point of view.
That was ancient Greece, right? So that was the equivalent. Ancient Greece had the concept that our perception of reality may not be the actual reality. They didn't have the concept that something could ever be capable of creating a simulation of everything that is perceived as reality. But they did have the concept of what we perceive as reality may not be actual reality. And so that's why I went back to Plato's allegory of the cave, not because Plato reminded us of supercomputers, because they didn't have that level of abstraction yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess I just feel like if we're assuming there is a higher being, why would we limit ourselves to assume that they wouldn't be able to create that Empire State Building?
Oh, first of all, I'm not assuming that there is a higher being. I'm just saying that if the universe is everything that we perceive as a simulation, then it must have been created by some higher being. But I actually don't think that's the case. I think that reality is reality. And so the reason that I wrote the paper was more or less to say, even if our reality is a simulation, I think that's irrelevant, because even if everything that we perceive is a simulation, our best strategy is to treat everything as if it's reality, even if it's really a simulation. And so that's where the whole conversation for tonight came about, is that I'm trying to argue that even if everything we perceive is a simulation, our best strategy is to treat it as reality. And so we might as well treat it as reality, whether it is or not.
Okay, so yeah, I'm just throwing out the idea there. If someone believes it's a simulation, then it does matter to them. Then it does become relevant to them.
So, but where would it, like, what's the scenario under which someone would think that it was a simulation and therefore act differently? Because like Olga gave the example of like, you still have to pay your rent, right? So if we said life is a simulation, therefore I'm going to stop paying my rent and let's just see what happens, right? Suddenly your life becomes miserable because you get thrown out of your house, you lose your job because you have no shower, and now you've gone in the toilet and you're a homeless person on the street. So that hasn't really served you well, right? To treat life as if it's a simulation and say, I just don't care about anything. So I would argue that.
Yeah, that's what I said. It's a question of, if you look at it purely from a moral standpoint, it's different than if you look at it from a belief standpoint. yeah, I think if you believe it's a simulation and you get out of the simulation, you get to go, yay, I was right. That's all.
Well, I mean, can we get out of the simulation, right? That's what I wrote in the paper, is that if this is a simulation by something powerful enough or someone powerful enough to simulate everything that we perceive, it's unlikely they give us an escape route, right? Like you would have to like give like anything that powerful would probably not, we're not going to outsmart it. I guess I scared him away. No, there you are. Sorry. I thought you laughed.
Sorry, just
I think that, we're not likely to outsmart something that is so powerful that it could create a simulation like the reality we perceive. So I'd argue that, that's unlikely to be the possibility. So that's I don't want to, it looks
it's
like
still important to the person who believes it, though. That's all.
I mean, it can be. And I guess what I'm saying, though, is that it shouldn't be, right? Is that even if you think that we live in a simulation, your best strategy is to treat it as reality. And I'm very open to like counter arguments and reasons why people think that my argument that that's true is wrong. I haven't heard it yet, but like I'm very open to hearing it, and I want to keep going through people that want to shoot holes in it. So Will, why don't you go next?
Thank you. Thanks for that. Just lower my hand, get that out of the way. And I just wanted to say, I'm just wondering, curious, can you hear me? Sorry, have I
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. People that prosecute the case for, that everything's a simulation, are they going on any sort of evidence at all? Like, is there anything that tweaks their curiosity, or is it just pure, speculation? Because as far as I can see, it's just so spurious a speculation as to not warrant really much investigation. I wouldn't think it deems being worthy of much analysis at all, because unless there's some, like, what about this? How can you explain this apparition one time or something? That just, to me, it seems like it's based on absolutely nothing whatsoever, other than being purely theoretical. And if there was, if we are living in a simulated reality, I wonder, why would we have things as mundane as biological functions, for instance, and just the absolute mundane things that wouldn't really matter to a super intelligent race that was observing us? Why would they create this reality with so much mundane, meaningless stuff going on? And that's about it, really. Pretty simple observation, but I just sort of throw that in there. Thank you.
I love that observation, Will, because I didn't think about the biological realities, right? Why would we have to go to the bathroom if it's a simulation? Like, how does that add any value to the simulation, right? It's totally irrelevant, in my opinion, to like anything that some higher intelligent being is going to learn about us. Like, it really, it doesn't add a lot of insight into the decision-making process of a sentient being to have that. So I would welcome anyone that can better answer that question than me to raise their hand and say, any evidence that anyone has that life is a simulation. The only thing that I can offer, Will, is that there are lots of unexplained things that people might say, well, this is explainable because we're in a simulation. But 2,000 years ago, people said, or even 200 or 300 years ago, people said that people died because of evil spirits, and instead it actually turned out to be bacteria that were killing people, when the things that were bacterial illnesses were called evil spirits killing us. And so there's all kinds of things that we don't understand today that we probably will understand tomorrow. So I would argue, learning and knowledge and wisdom are constantly evolving. So I don't really understand the perspective of someone arguing for simulation theory, which is part of why I wrote the paper, is to try to say, it seems to me like it's irrelevant whether or not we live in it. Although, and that kind of circumvents the whole, how much evidence do we have for it? Because even if we have evidence that there is a simulation, if it's irrelevant whether or not we live in a simulation, then the whole point is moot. And so I went at it from that approach. But I welcome anyone that has good reasons to think we live in a simulation to offer those up. With that said, Will, did you have anything else, or should we go to Ron? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say, like, I mean, I'm kind of agnostic in a lot of ways, but I can't entertain the simulation theory much at all. However, you know, I firmly believe that there are possibly things beyond our comprehension as intelligent apes that perhaps we just cannot comprehend. But I mean, you know, like the laws of physics can't invent themselves, for instance, that matter emerged from either pure nothingness, or alternatively, it existed infinitely without first cause. And then, you know, we've got a known universe that's 90 billion light years wide, and we cannot, well, like, apparently humans cannot comprehend how incomprehensible some things are, like the fact that 90 billion light years is the size of the known universe. So I'm not ruling out that there aren't things of which we cannot possibly comprehend. But simulation, you know, just merely on the reasons I gave before, the simulation theory to me just seems not worthy of much consideration. But then, you know, I have entertained the thought that perhaps some super intelligent race invented or manipulated DNA and just sort of chucked a vial on various planets as they fly by, and they come back every now and then to check out how the DNA worked out. But, you know, that's very hypothetical, good in movie scripts, but film scripts, but and fun for thought. But other than that, you know, most of it's just so theoretical. But we do live in some sort of magnificent universe that the mystery and the wonder is what gives me inspiration every day, that we live in some kind of miracle without invoking an omnipotent being, but we live in a reality that we cannot explain. I think, you know, the best physicists in the world cannot come even close to defining what consciousness is, where it exists, or how matter emerged from utter nothingness, or alternatively, it existed infinitely without first cause. So to me, that's inspiring.
Yeah, so those are two topics that I'd like to come back to, Will, and I hope you'll come for them. One is the origins of the universe, which I side with the Greeks in thinking that there's an infinite universe, and I think I have a pretty good argument for that. The other is about consciousness, and I think I have a pretty good explanation of what, like, how consciousness works, and my paper on free will is kind of the root of that. So if that's a topic of interest to you, I would welcome you to look at the YouTube video once it's up on free will. If you agree with my argument on free will, I think I have a very good explanation of consciousness. If you don't agree with my argument on free will, it will not be convincing. So that said, those are two topics for another night, one of which will be a continuation of free will. We are going to do a conversation on consciousness. A couple of the leadership team and I are going to talk about our perspectives on consciousness. So that will come up at some point in the next couple of months, probably. Anything else for you, Will, or can we go to Ron?
No, thanks. Just are the links in your website, or will they be in the
Let me post them again. The YouTube channel is here, and so I'll post them into the chat along with the online community, which we would love for you all to join. And so, yeah, please join the online community. We would love to get good conversations going on there between these Tuesday night events. And I'm happy to talk about all of these things in there with anyone on an offline basis, although we'll have events on them at some point as well. Ron, go ahead.
Very much.
Yeah, thank you, Will. Great points.
Thank you, Garrett. I guess I'll address Will's understandable skepticism about the very concept of
The argument for simulation theory, you mean?
Yeah, sorry, the word
That's okay.
simulation dropped out of my brain for a minute.
That's okay.
Yeah, the simulation. So at first, just a couple of analogies to sort of set the table for why I think it's a very reasonable possibility. One is the simulation that we're all familiar with if we go to the movies and we watch a movie in the theater or a play, or we read a novel. when we get immersed in the movie, for example, the simulation, we all would agree it's just a simulation of life, right? A movie. And we can get lost in it and think it's real, whether, if it's a drama, we're sad. If it's a comedy, we laugh. Romance, we feel wonderful. But we all know that the movie and the play and the novel eventually come to an end and the simulation is over. But there was somebody that was aware in all those instances of the simulation, right? So that's one reason to show how convincing a simulation could be. A more convincing one might be when we go to sleep at night and we dream. And we dream that we're flying, or we won the lottery, or, my long lost love came back to life, whatever it is. When you're dreaming, that simulation is very convincing as well. But again, whenever we wake up from that dream, we go, oh, that was just a dream, a simulation. And the last one I'll give you is the Plato cave that you mentioned. Plato was trying to point out the same thing, but what he said that the shadows that were appearing were as a result of the real items passing in front of the fire and casting the shadows. And so he was implying there that the real things were real and the shadows were the simulation of the real things. But by analogy, he was trying to say that when you come out in the cave even, and you see what, quote, are the real things, he says, it's just as possible that those are just simulations. And he made the distinction between the phenomenal world, which we normally call the real world, as opposed to the noumenal world, something further back. Just like in the cave, there was something further back. So again, these are all examples of the ability of the simulation being very convincing. Now, the other point that I wanted to make is if there is something, if all of these simulations are there, right? In each of these cases, there was something behind it, right? That was creating this. There always seems to be something creating the simulation, whether it's the movie, the novel, the dream, the shadows. So, if it turns out that this world that we live in is a simulation, again, I get back to my original thing. What's behind it all? And if you say it's artificial intelligence or it's aliens, you haven't answered the question, because the question is always going to be, what's behind the artificial intelligence? And what's behind where'd the aliens come from? So again, you're back to this question of not getting caught up in the simulation, if indeed it is a simulation, but to be caught up in the question of who or what is the simulator, and how do I relate to that simulator?
Yeah, and I guess Ron, the way that I look at it is, what were we born with? The simulator would kind of give us some ability, I think, to relate to them if they wanted us to. And so what were we born with? We were born with, to me, an inherent ability to reason and an inherent ability to discern, right from wrong, and what's fair and what's not fair, what the Stoics call justice. I think those are things that we inherently have, and they can often be clouded with life and different arguments and different paradigms. And lots of things can get in the way of being in touch with our innate sense of fairness or justice. But I think we all have an inherent sense of fairness and justice that when it's violated, really badly, becomes really loud and clear. And those of us that are trying to be very in tune with it can get maybe finer than people who have had really traumatic lives where they may have been thrown off. And so I think, Ron, if I can try to answer for me, and I'm happy to have anyone else answer for them, how do we get in touch with, anything that, or anyone that created the simulation? And I actually don't believe in a simulation, but I believe in a higher power. And I think the same way we get in touch with a higher power is the same way we get in touch with whoever or whatever created the simulation, if there is a simulation. And that is to take, what we were born with inherently and be in touch with that, which is the ability to know, what's fair and what's just, and the ability to reason through things. And so,
I'll just
Go
add
ahead.
very briefly, Garrett. Everything you said about using the mind and using reason and thinking things through critically and weighing and judging evidence and all of that. What I would say is that all of that can be watched like a movie. There's something in you. I'll call it awareness. It's a very sort of doesn't carry a lot of baggage, but there's an awareness in each of us as human beings that can be aware of these movies going on in our mind, right? And if everything that's going in our minds is just a dream, then the question is, what is that awareness that can be aware of all of these things? And maybe that awareness is what we're calling in this conversation the sorry guys, that word keeps escaping my brain. Simulation. Yeah. So the awareness may be what in this conversation we're referring to as the simulator. And the question then to ask yourself, and this is a very relevant question for each of us as a human being, what is that awareness that is aware of all of this? And do I have a relationship to that awareness? Because there's no denying that awareness exists. There's nobody on this Zoom meetup who will say that they don't exist. There's something back there that's aware of all of these simulations. And again, I keep pointing the arrow back that that's the real issue, and not to get involved in simulations, because they're all just simulations at the end of the day. They're all dreams. They all vanish. They're not real. They're not permanent. They're not eternal. But maybe the one thing that might be real and eternal might be that awareness.
Yeah, I
I'll
guess.
stop there.
No, it's great, Ron. And I think the comparison to a movie is really interesting, because you can also, you said the movie has an end and we know the end is coming. Well, our life has an end and we know the end is coming of our life at some point. The one certainty is that we're all eventually going to die, right? So,
But wait a minute, Garrett.
Yeah.
All we know is that the body is going to die. We don't know
True.
that we are going to die.
Yeah, and I don't think that the spirit dies. So I agree with you, Ron. But I think the comparison to a movie is a good comparison, because this life is going to end, right? The life that we're experiencing right now, we know will end at some point. Whether we're reborn or not, probably, Ron, you and I agree that we probably will be. Certainly this life is going to end, right? The life that we know right now, that all of us on this Zoom meeting, this life will end at some point. Does that make sense? And so I was just saying, I think it's an interesting comparison and I agree with it. And I guess the question about whether or not things are real and eternal, I would argue that objective reality is eternal. And I think that truth, like about objective reality, is eternal. That becomes another theoretical conversation. But that's part of why I wrote this paper, is that I think that truth about objective reality is like, it is real and it is eternal. Do you have any reason to disagree with that, Ron?
Well, I have a lot of reasons, and I spent a lifetime, looking at these issues, but I'm not going to take up more people. Other people need to speak. So,
Okay, so we'll go to Sam Deans if you want.
Yeah.
Sam, you want to go ahead?
Yes, sir. So, are you familiar with what the Mandela effect is?
Oh, boy.
Is that the butterfly changing, the butterfly in Asia changing the weather patterns in North America?
No, I don't believe so. No, the
It's
Mandela.
sorry to interrupt, but it's a mathematical formula that exists in cellular biology everywhere. It's absolutely amazing. The Mandelbrot set. Is that what you mean, Sam? Sorry to interrupt.
No, the Mandela effect. So the concept goes originally that everyone thought that Nelson Mandela died, but then when he actually died, everyone was very surprised because they thought he had already died. And in the years following this event, it was found that things like this tended to happen more often. I have a whole list right here of things that people thought were true, but ended up being just slightly tweaked. For example, the logo for Fruit of the Loom doesn't have a cornucopia in it. Now, I thought, I was positive that it did have a cornucopia in the back. Another example is the Monopoly guy having an eyeglass. Turns out he doesn't have an eyeglass. Looney Tunes with two O's is actually Looney Tunes, UNES. Now, I believe that this has to do with the simulation because, well, you could argue this one of two ways. You could argue it that there are parallel dimensions and that something happened that's causing them to switch back and forth and causing the people's consciousness to be swapped back and forth. But I think it would be very interesting to apply this to the simulation concept. Now, the simulation concept is, from what I understand, is that there is the main reality, the reality that created this simulation. And then there is the simulation that, let's say, we are in. Now, I don't know. I just think it's really interesting because it's like, these are like concrete things that you can see images of that are, it's like, you remember them specifically differently and other people remember them specifically differently. So I think it's something very interesting that should be considered. I heard someone say, oh man, like this was something to be passed off with. Whoever expressed that, I'd very much like to hear what your thoughts are.
I think that was Will.
Yeah, I just, to me, they might be, I was just listening from afar. Sorry, I had someone, a neighbor at the door there. So I was kind of had one ear tuned in, but to Sam, is it?
Yep.
Yeah, Sam, how you doing? I mean, to me, they're just possibly, like statistical anomaly type things, just not really, from what I heard, there was no real great evidence there to suggest that there's any alternate reality going on with what was it? The guy with the glasses in Monopoly, the eyeglass in Monopoly, it doesn't actually exist, and the Looney Tunes logo, I heard you say, and the Nelson Mandela was rumored to be dead. I mean, the things I just vaguely heard there was nothing sort of compelling at all. I mean, from what I heard.
What would you consider compelling? What evidence would you consider?
I mean, if you could see sort of ghost images walking up the street, or now and then a hand emerge through your roof, other than when you're tripping on, psychedelics, sort of, and something just appears, even then, these things have to be looked at with the absolute finest prism of skepticism. I mean, here in Australia, there was a massive UFO case a few years back. And I actually spoke to the guy who's sort of fully in charge of the Australian UFO Society. And he's actually a professor of astrophysics, runs the UFO Society. And I found that very intriguing in itself. But he told me that to get to the truth, you need to be more skeptical than a skeptic. So, and I found that, I was in a skeptics society here, and I found that those guys were as intrigued with this stuff as anyone else, but you've got to be so skeptical and come at it from the hardest line of scientific inquiry. And then you get the tiny little grain of sand out of the whole truckload that you just cannot explain. And that's when it gets interesting. But those anomalies that you mentioned, to me, there was sort of no alarms went off at all. But as I say, I've got an open mind, like some people. I've got a friend, he's just done a doctorate of philosophy, and he doesn't prosecute, but he entertains the alternate universe reality, or the simulated universe theory. He entertains it, which amazes me, given that he's normally such a materialist and a skeptic. But I mean, he would rule out anything that can't be explained. I don't do that. What I'm trying to say is I'm pretty agnostic. However, I just think the simulated reality just doesn't hold water.
And let me try a different response, Sam. Is let's suppose that those misperceptions were because of the simulator implanting, I guess is what you're saying, those misperceptions. What reason would they have to make those mass misunderstandings exist? Like, why would that be to their benefit? Like, what are they getting out of it? Like, there would have to be some reason for it, right?
Yeah, of course. And I believe perhaps it's the simulation of breaking down. And the whole simulation, I believe that it might be, an experiment to learn something. It's all these little things to see how people react. So in this concept that the humans created the simulation, it's for the humans, us humans, to garner information and knowledge about how human history progresses. Now, if this is true, the idea that the humans created the simulation, they may be speeding up what we're experiencing for them, but to us it's happening in a normal time, because I don't know if anyone is familiar with the concept of black holes and the difference in time, but for those who are not familiar, I'll explain it really quick. So when one is falling into a black hole, time slows down. Yes, time slows down. But for people who are outside of the black hole, time goes at a normal pace. So if someone were to come out of the black hole, they would find that time has passed at an enormous rate. Some entertainment examples of this is if you've seen Interstellar, that happens. It's the same concept of, entering an atmosphere. People that go to the moon, their time doesn't seem as long or different, but basically difference in time. So what I'm getting at here is that these different little things are like droplets in a calm pond, and it's for information to be garnered for how things may go if certain events occur. I hope that.
I had heard in terms of black holes, Sam, I had read or heard that nothing escapes black hole. Isn't that correct? Nothing can escape black hole. Isn't that?
So
That's what I've
theoretically,
read.
I think gamma radiation can escape a black hole, or Hawking radiation is supposed to be theoretically supposed to be able to escape a black hole. But Jenny, like, all mass energy is pretty much swallowed by a black hole, including light itself. So
I was pulling from my knowledge of Stephen Hawking's findings.
but it's theoretical that even Hawking radiation can escape a black hole. That's not validated yet, as far as I know. That said, if Olga, Ayala, and Robert don't mind, I kind of want to let Iro go because he or she has not spoken yet. So, and we're getting at like 5 to 9. So, and I apologize if I pronounced your name wrong. Feel free to correct me.
Hey there, is this thing working all right?
Yep, it's working. Go ahead, you're on.
All right. So well, one of the things I'm curious about is when you're dealing with with something as inaccessible as, for example, like how do you conduct an empirical, like a scientific examination of whether or not we live in a simulation? I was wondering if that would be a situation in which it's appropriate to become more of a rationalist and try and figure it out through pure theoretical reasoning. So I was curious if anyone had any, I don't know if the word would be epistemic or what, but if anyone had any thoughts about the role of speculation and how can we speculate responsibly and intelligently. I was also wondering if the I forgot his name, but if the Australian gentleman could say something, because it felt as though he was headed in that kind of a direction, but he could elaborate if anyone has any thoughts.
Anyone's welcome to chime in. I guess you know my answer, which is to use game theory and hypothesize from the perspective of, you know, if the world is a simulation, then what might be the case, and hypothesize against what we can potentially infer as higher or lower probability possibilities. And so that was basically what the paper was based on. But if anyone else wants to give their opinion, feel free.
I have like a alternate approach, but I don't know if it's epistemic or not, I guess.
I mean, it is like, I guess my epistemics, I'm told most closely aligned to Bayesian, I forget the exact term, but it's basically like the higher probability something is to be true, the more likely we believe it's true. And for me, that feels very natural, right? If I think it's more likely to be true, then yeah, I'm more likely to believe it's true. And so that's kind of the approach that I take to epistemology. I have a paper on that as well, which more or less makes that argument. That's the very Cliff Notes version of it. If anyone else has responses, feel free. Otherwise,
Yeah,
I want to
yeah.
go ahead.
Just briefly, because I remember to say when I was trying to address Will's skepticism about simulations, and that's the record we have even in human history. Going back, you know, recorded history is roughly 5,000 years, and we know people were doing things even before they started writing them down. But there's been an immense amount of what we would today call scientific research on this idea of simulation. It's not normally thought of as scientific research, but all of the civilizations have gone deeply inward. Usually the terms that will most often come up is meditation, but various other words can be used to describe going inward and allowing our ordinary mind to slow down all the thoughts and everything. And they have scientifically, you know, experimented on themselves with allowing the mind to slow down to almost no activity, okay? So the brain is no longer, you know, emitting ideas and so forth. It's almost like being in the state of deep sleep. And yet they report, and these reports are correlate around the planet through the millennia, that there is another state when the mind totally goes into cessation. And they have all kinds of different words for it, but they always say the words don't do it justice. They just point to it. But it can be experienced. It can't be spoken of. It's ineffable, that state, but it does exist and it can be experienced. Now, the reason that, again, I consider that as a very good reason to at least be very open to the idea that our ordinary reality that's created by our minds is just a simulation, is because there's so much evidence through the centuries across the planet that there is this deeper level of awareness and everything that, like, for example, everything that Garrett pulls out, all his reasons, all his logic, all his thinking, all his evidence, so everything is based on what his mind is making accessible to him, so to speak. But the question is, everything that the mind is making accessible to you, Garrett, is any of it, at the end of the day, actually dependable? Or is it all, everything that your mind presents is just a movie, a play, a simulation? And see, you're stuck not going back far enough as far as I see it. You're totally dependent ultimately on what your brain will decide on using reason. But we know now, we're beginning to realize how magnificent the brain is, and at the same time, how totally limited it is. The more it understands, the more questions arise, and the questions begin to outnumber the answers more and more. So maybe the way to find the real answers is to, I'm speaking metaphorically here, is go beyond the mind, beyond the rational mind, and see if there is something else that reports have said through the millennia across the planet. There is something that is prior to and above, beyond the mind. I see I've stimulated Will, so I'll pass the torch.
I want to let you respond, Will, but like, cause if you have something to say, but I do want to shut down for the evening, because it's 9 o'clock here in the US and I've been up since 4 o'clock. So it's been a long day. But Will, go ahead and respond. And then what I'm going to suggest is that we continue the conversation in the online community, because I do want to hear what Olga, Ayala, and Robert have to say. But if you guys don't mind, join the online community. I'll put the link in again, and then we can continue the conversation there. For me, it'll be tomorrow, but other people will probably be able to do it tonight.
Okay, excuse me, just a quick question.
Olga, I just want to let Will, because Will was starting to respond to Ron and I was cutting him off.
I have a quick question. Are you going to save chat and publish it?
I don't know whether or not the chat gets published in the YouTube videos. That's a question for Mayu in the online community. Or if you look at the old YouTube recordings, you'll either see the chat or you won't. So try looking at it. You can save it. What's that?
You can save the chat, Olga.
No, I cannot, fortunately. I'm on my phone. On the phone, it's not savable. It's savable only on computer.
Olga, if you want to put your email into the chat, I will send you an email with the chat.
Okay, I will contact you through Meetup.
You can send it to me. Well, yeah, you can. If you can put it in like the chat here.
No, I will contact you through Meetup.
Okay, later. That's fine. So go ahead, Will.
Thanks.
Thanks. I just in response to Ron, I think you're talking about the substrate consciousness that the Buddhists sort of talk about, that going back thousands of years, the Buddhists have been studying the nature of mind, and they say that everything arises in consciousness itself. And you were saying how, you know, Gareth has got lots of knowledge and sophisticated understanding of things, but this is all just produced by his mind. And below that lies, I think what you're referring to is substrate consciousness. However, I think that's what, you know, awareness, as Sam Harris, I'm a huge fan of Sam Harris with his Waking Up app and doing the meditation that they're trying to bring the Eastern wisdom of the mind to the neurotic West. They've been trying to do this for a couple of decades now. And, you know, Sam Harris produces a non-theological version of it with the Waking Up app, which is just brilliant. I mean, he's a neuroscientist, philosopher, just a genius. Anyway, that's my plug for Sam Harris. But I think you're talking about, because he talks about this stuff a lot, like where is the mind? I mean, you feel like you're above your jaw and below your top of your head. We kind of feel like we're in there. But when you meditate on that, you go, you know, where am I actually? Like, it is this ethereal state of consciousness, which the Buddhists refer to as the substrate. And all our perception of the world arises with the consciousness. So when we're all little babies in the maternity ward, kicking our legs in the crib, we all just shared consciousness, as all creatures do. Every bird in the tree is just conscious. But then we've got the ability to sort of interpret the world according to things which occur in the prefrontal cortex. It's fascinating stuff, but that's my understanding in relation to what you said, Ron, that it's the substrate consciousness. Consciousness emerges, and then we interpret the world within the consciousness, as I understand it. But Sam Harris, I don't know if you just YouTube Sam Harris, Waking Up. It's all free. He's absolutely fascinating stuff.
Great. I
Thanks
appreciate that.
again, Gareth.
Thank you. I want to thank everybody for coming and for all of you for staying to the end. I know some other people said they had to go, and you know, everyone has other obligations that come up. But I just want to thank you all for coming and being a part of such an interesting conversation. It was a lot of fun for me. I hope you guys enjoyed yourselves as well, and would love to invite you all to come back. Trying to remember what next week's is. We usually like to mention it, but I don't remember, but we'll have another one next Tuesday. Keep an eye out for it. And would again love you all to join in the online community. And Olga and Robert, I'd love to hear what you guys were going to ask in the online community, and I'll respond to you tomorrow when I'm more well rested and will be able to respond a little more coherently. I'm getting pretty sleepy. So that said, we also do try to keep it to 2 hours because that's already a pretty long event.
How do I access your online community?
So if you go to freethinkerinstitute.org, I'll put the
just put a link there in the chat.
Thinkerinstitute.org. There's a link to the online community in there, and you know, it's done through software called Discord, which allows you to do like text chat, voice chat, video chat, screen shares. So it really lets you do everything, you know, online. So other than the metaverse, everything but the metaverse. So and so it's pretty cool. It's a great way to interact and stay in touch with each other. And you can come in when you have some spare time and see what people have chatted with. If you look at the channels are on the left. And so if you look at the channels that are in bold, those are channels that people have said something since the last time you came, and it'll automatically go to the most recent thing that you haven't read. And then you can kind of catch up with each of the channels. So it's very good at like letting you come when you have spare time, and then letting you leave when you don't have spare time. And then when you come back, you'll just see all the new stuff when you come in. And so it's a very efficient way of like interacting with a large group of people. And you know, right now it's not super active, but I would love for all of you to be active there. It only takes a few people to like, you know, keep a good conversation going. And if you start chatting with someone in text chat, you can say, hey, do you want to switch to voice chat? And then you can go to voice chat. And so it's very easy to switch back and forth between text chat and voice chat. It's like half a second to go into voice chat. It's super easy and efficient, and you can have, you know, lots of people in voice chat. So it's a lot of fun. Highly recommend it. I normally do a demo, but because it's really late, I probably won't do a demo tonight, but I like to do a demo to show people how it works, because there is a little bit of a learning curve. And so if you're a little, you know, feeling like it's a little bit confusing, like, yes, it is a little confusing. if you try hard at it for like a week or two, you'll get used to it and it'll actually be super intuitive and useful. But there is a learning curve. But it's the most powerful community building tool that I found, which is why I use it. And it's totally free, unlike Slack, which you have to pay for history. Discord has total history and it's totally free. So it gets paid for by the gaming community. That's where it grew up in, as the gaming community. And so all the bills get paid by the gamers who buy like digital widgets, and that pays for the servers to keep running for the rest of us that use it for philosophy and business and other stuff. So
Wow.
so just want to thank everyone again for coming, and would love to keep in touch with you all in the online community, and hope to see you guys at next Tuesday's event or future events on Tuesdays. We are usually more practical than this. We like to focus on practical philosophy, but we're going to have a back and forth between theoretical and practical for the next couple of months until we get our full curriculum in place, and then we'll probably have a lot of practical stuff in a row after that. So thanks a lot, everybody. Hope you all have a great night. And again, thanks for coming.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.